He boarded the bus like he did every Tuesday at exactly 9:43. Same tattered coat, same slow, deliberate steps, same look in his eyes that suggested he had lived through more than he cared to explain. But this Tuesday was different. A teenager in a black hoodie stood in the aisle, blocking his way. He had earbuds in, one eye on his phone, the other scanning for someone to impress. As the old man tried to pass, the teen looked him up and down, scoffed, and muttered something too soft for others to hear, then raised his hand. If stories like this move you, if you believe unseen heroes deserve to be honored, subscribe now to Classified Stories. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? Let's see how far respect can travel. And please, don't forget to like the video. It helps keep these voices alive. A loud smack echoed through the narrow space. The old man staggered, catching himself with the worn wooden cane that rarely left his grip. No one said a word. The passengers looked away, some with discomfort, others with silent agreement that the man had somehow invited the disrespect. An elderly woman in the back flinched. A businessman pretended to be asleep. And the teen? He laughed. Loudly. The bus kept moving. The man didn't yell. He didn't fight back. He just sat down, slowly, in the first available seat. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but something else, something deeper. He opened inside his coat, revealing a glint of metal tucked between fabric folds, barely visible but unmistakable. A fragment of shrapnel, still lodged beneath his skin. He remembered the exact sound the mortar had made in Fallujah. He closed his coat again, and then he smiled just slightly, because what none of them knew was this. This wasn't the first time he had been hit, but it would be the last time someone did it without knowing who they had just touched. 35 years ago, Harold Morgan returned from the war with a limp, a Bronze Star, and a silence no one wanted to ask about. The parade was short, the cheers even shorter. And when the noise faded, so did the people. His sister picked him up from the base in a borrowed car, barely meeting his eyes. She said their father was tired and couldn't make the drive. That was the first cut. At dinner, no one asked what had happened. They just commented on how lucky he was to come back alive. When he mentioned the names of the men who didn't, no one responded. That was the second cut. A week later, he was handed an envelope with a job offer at a local security firm. No medals, no interviews, just a backdoor handshake, and the understanding that his past was something better left unspoken. The country had moved on. So had his family. At his niece's wedding, he wore his best uniform, the same boots he had marched in through Ramadi. But the bride's father introduced him to guests as just Uncle Harold. He's kind of quiet, but harmless. People smiled, then turned to someone more interesting. He learned to live small, to sit in corners, to speak only when spoken to let the world forget him without protest. But he never forgot them. And somewhere deep inside, beneath the discipline and silence, something remained sharp and awake, waiting for the moment when forgetting him would no longer be an option. The bus driver never reported it. No police were called. No disciplinary action was taken. But someone had filmed it. A woman in the back row, half hidden behind a baby stroller, had caught the moment on her phone. The sound of the slap, the man's stumble, his silence, and that fleeting glimpse of something metallic as he opened his coat. By evening, the clip had 38,000 views. By morning, it had over 1 million. Comments poured in, some mocking, most outraged. But one stood out. That man is Staff Sergeant Harold Morgan. Fallujah, 2004. He pulled me out after the blast. Saved my life. He shouldn't be riding a bus alone. That comment came from someone with a verified profile, a combat medic, and then it was picked up by military groups, veteran pages, journalists. By 4 p.m., a local news station was parked outside Harold's modest apartment, waiting for a quote he wouldn't give. He stayed inside, curtains drawn, hands trembling, not from shame, but from something he couldn't name, not fear, not pride, something in between. He didn't ask for recognition, but this time it was coming anyway. 2 days after the video went viral, Harold received a call from a number he didn't recognize. He let it ring, then it rang again, and again. On the fourth call, he answered, "Staff Sergeant Morgan?" The voice was deep. "Steady. This is General Elijah Rourke. We served in the same theater. I owe you a long overdue conversation." Harold said nothing at first. Then, "Yes, sir," he whispered, the same way he used to before walking into danger. By noon, his phone was flooded. Messages, missed calls, journalists, veterans, even students. But the one that mattered most was from a man named Tom Diaz. Tom had been a private in Harold's unit. In 2004, during a nighttime ambush, Tom had been shot through the leg and left behind. Harold went back, dragged him through gunfire. That decision cost Harold half the hearing in his right ear. Tom never forgot. Now, standing in front of a local news camera, Tom said the words no one had ever heard before. He's not quiet because he's broken. He's quiet because he remembers everything. That clip played on national television, and behind closed doors, commanders started whispering. Who authorized this man to be forgotten? By evening, a directive was issued. Harold Morgan was to be formally recognized, but not just with a plaque, with a ceremony, a public one, with cameras, officers, and full honors. And one more thing, General Rourke would deliver the speech himself. The morning of the ceremony, Harold stood in front of the mirror longer than usual. He wore the uniform he had kept sealed in plastic since 2008. It still fit, barely, but the medals were dull, the fabric stiff with time. He stared at his reflection, hands hovering over each ribbon, his Bronze Star, his Combat Infantryman badge, the Purple Heart, and a small, worn photo of his unit, folded into the inner pocket. All of them grinning, 4 of them gone. The knock at the door startled him. A young corporal in full dress blues saluted the moment Harold opened it. "Sir, your transport is waiting. We got a full escort." Harold hesitated. He looked down at his boots. The laces were shaking. Or maybe it was just his hands. "I don't belong there," he said quietly. "I'm not anyone." The corporal held his gaze. "Sir, with all due respect, you're the reason I enlisted." Harold closed the door behind him. As the car approached the base, crowds lined the fence. Not for him. At least that's what he thought. But someone in the crowd shouted, "It's him!" Then another, and another. Soon, applause erupted like a tide breaking against a dam that had held too long. His face stayed calm, stone almost, but inside, something cracked. Not out of pride, out of disbelief. He had spent years learning how to disappear. Now, they were calling his name. The base's parade ground had never seen a silence so heavy. Rows of soldiers stood at attention, medals gleaming in the morning sun. Cameras rolled. Reporters whispered. Families watched from behind ropes. And in the center, standing beside General Rourke, was Harold Morgan, stoic, hands clasped behind his back. He had declined to speak. He didn't trust his voice not to crack. So the general spoke for him. "This man," Rourke began, "has bled for this country, then bled again in silence when we chose to forget him. But silence doesn't erase valor. And time doesn't make courage any less real." He turned to Harold, then without hesitation saluted him. It wasn't performative. It wasn't scripted. It was a salute of a man acknowledging another who had been beneath his command and far above his strength. What happened next wasn't planned. One by one, the soldiers behind the general began to salute as well. The line extended. Officers, cadets, veterans. Even members of the press stood, silent, some with hands over their hearts. Then, from the back row, someone called out, "Fallujah, 2004. He saved my brother." Another voice. "That's Morgan, Ramadi team leader." Tears welled in Harold's eyes, not from the recognition, but from remembering the faces of the men who couldn't be there to see it. And just as he turned to step down, the teenager from the bus emerged from the crowd. He was escorted by military police, head down, remorse etched in every movement. He stopped in front of Harold, shaking. "I didn't know," the boy whispered. I'm sorry." Harold looked at him, then, slowly, placed his hand on the teen's shoulder. "You do now," he said. And with that, He turned toward the crowd, the shrapnel still in his chest. But something far heavier finally lifted. That night, Harold couldn't sleep. The applause still rang in his ears, not as praise, but as pressure. He sat alone in his apartment, the medal still pinned to his uniform, staring at his own hands. For decades, he had lived with the silence of being invisible. Now, the noise of being seen was louder than any battlefield. His mailbox overflowed. Letters from strangers, notes from soldiers, drawings from children. One envelope came from a woman whose husband had died in Harold's unit. Inside was a photograph of them both, young, smiling, untouched by war. You were the last person to see him. The note read, "I just want to thank you for making sure he wasn't alone." Harold wept for the first time in years. But not everyone celebrated his story. A man from the old neighborhood posted an op-ed online accusing Harold of feeding the veteran cult. Another wrote, "He's just another soldier glorified by guilt." Harold didn't respond, but he felt the familiar sting, just like after the war. The public could love you one day and bury you the next. It reminded him of Private Bell. Bell had survived 2 tours and taken his own life weeks after returning. Harold had tried to reach out, but the silence on the other end of the line was all he ever got. Now Harold walked through that silence again. This time, though, it was filled with voices. On the 3rd day, a local high school invited him to speak. He refused, then accepted, then rewrote his words 15 times. Standing in front of 30 restless students, he didn't talk about combat. He talked about being forgotten, about the quiet that follows after everyone claps and moves on. "I'm not a hero," he told them. "I'm just someone who kept walking when everyone else stopped looking." One student raised her hand. "What should we do when we see someone being ignored?" Harold paused. "Don't look away," he said, "even if it's uncomfortable, especially then." He left the room in silence. But one by one, the students stood and clapped, not because they were told to, but because something in his voice made them feel responsible. That night, he finally took off his uniform, folded it carefully, and placed it back in the plastic cover, not to forget it again, but to protect what it meant. In the weeks following the ceremony, something strange happened. People started looking up his name. Old mission reports were pulled from dusty archives. A photo of Harold, young and sunburned in the deserts of Iraq, made the front page of a national newspaper with a headline, "The Man We Forgot." Veteran support groups saw a spike in calls. Students requested to interview Harold for school projects. 2 senators cited his story while pushing for new legislation on veteran mental health. But something more personal began to shift too. At the base where Harold had once trained, a new hallway was renamed Morgan Passage. It featured portraits of overlooked heroes, quiet soldiers whose stories had gone untold. One morning, Harold walked that hallway alone. He stopped in front of one photograph in particular, his unit in Ramadi. He traced their faces with his fingers, then placed the old, folded photo from his coat pocket into a small frame left open beside it. That was the only thing he added. No plaque, no quote, just memory, finally acknowledged. And then there were the calls. Former soldiers, men he hadn't heard from in decades. One said, "I thought you were dead." Another, "You were the only one who didn't leave me behind." One broke down before finishing his sentence. The teenager from the bus returned too, this time with his father. They asked permission to volunteer at a local veteran shelter. Harold didn't say yes. He simply showed up the next day and handed them both brooms. Service, after all, was never about applause. It was about doing the right thing when no one was watching. And now, finally it was spring again. The same bus route, the same Tuesday, 9:43. But this time, when Harold stepped onto the vehicle, something was different. People stood, not all of them, not dramatically, but enough. One young man offered a seat. Another nodded quietly, recognizing the face from a video, the ceremony, the hallway. Harold smiled, almost imperceptibly, and took his seat near the window. He didn't need applause. He didn't even need acknowledgement. He had something better now, presence. In his small apartment, beside the window where he liked to sit in the evenings, hung a single frame. Inside it, not a medal, not even the newspaper articles, just a folded flag. And underneath, a note written in strong, trembling handwriting. Fallujah didn't break me. Being forgotten almost did. But now I know, quiet doesn't mean invisible. Every Sunday, he returned to the base, not to be honored, but to serve. He mentored young recruits, shared stories only when asked, and handed out books instead of advice. When asked how he survived all he had, he gave the same answer every time. You survive by holding on to the people who don't know your name yet. And when he finally passed, 2 years later, the funeral was standing room only. A general delivered the eulogy. The teen from the bus, now in uniform, stood in the front row. And the last to speak was Tom Diaz, who said just 5 words before stepping back. He remembered us. We remember him. As the honor guard folded the flag, a breeze lifted through the cemetery. No thunderous sound. No grand finale. Just silence. The kind that comes not from absence, but from reverence.